Hi, I'm Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report. Markets, finance, scandal, and today we're going to take a look at the economics of war and warfare. Let's go to political analyst Stacy Herbert.
Max Keiser, we have been saying here that the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq in particular have caused this giant financial disaster around the world. Now, witness this video of Tony Blair being interviewed in the United States this weekend.
Roll it, roll it, roll it. Let's check it out. Tony Blair.
You talk about Vice President Cheney at the time. Quote, he would have worked through the whole lot, Iraq, Syria, Iran, dealing with all their surrogates in the course of it, Hezbollah, Hamas, etc. In other words, he thought the world had to be made anew and that after the September 11th it had to be done by force and with urgency. So, would he have gone through all that lot?
He didn't say that in those meetings, but, you know, Dick was always absolutely hard line on these things. I mean, I don't think he would openly avow this. His worldview was that the world had to be remade after September the 11th. But you can't dismiss that Cheney view and say, well, that's just, that's stupid.
Okay, Tony Blair saying we can't dismiss Cheney's view as stupid. Dick Cheney, megalomaniac, warmonger, guilty of war crimes, insider trader, created the insider panel with the Bush administration, father of the Enron scandal, father of the Halliburton scandals, father of the scandals over there at Blackwater, now Z. He is evil incarnate. When Ronald Reagan talked about the axis of evil, it was Dick Cheney, his mirror image, and the mirror image of his mirror image. He is the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost of evil, Dick Cheney. And he's absolutely wrecking, he has wrecked, I should say, the American economy. And this is absurd. Tony Blair, remember, is Dick Cheney's little poodle. Remember, Dick Cheney goes down to Washington Avenue, you know, we're in Washington, and look at the end of the leash. There's little Tony Blair. Yep. Yes, I'll spend British money on your wars. Yes, I'm a little poodle. He's disgusting. Blair is, why is Blair not in front of a tribunal right now?
Well, he says it's not stupid, Cheney's view. But let's look how stupid it is, because the other thing, it's a scandal you forgot there, was that Cheney was the head of the scandal of 9/11. Okay? What America has lost. It's clear we overreacted to 9/11. This is Fareed Zakaria at Newsweek now. And he's discussing this vast warfare state, which is bigger than any sort of social welfare state one can imagine. So he's talking since 9/11 that the amount of money spent on intelligence in the United States has increased by 250% to $75 billion that they publicly admit to. Even this public admission of $75 billion annually is more than the rest of the world combined on intelligence. Furthermore, America has now built 33 new building complexes just for the intelligence bureaucracies. Homeland Security now has 250,000 employees. So when you see all those Glenn Beck and Sarah Palin people rallying against poor people collecting money, forget about those. The giant bureaucracies is number one, the Pentagon, number two, the Bureau of Veteran Affairs, and number three, Homeland Security. It's this giant apparatus creating 50,000 reports a year, 136 a day. That is the definition of a command and control communist centralized government.
And it's right now in America. And you're absolutely right, this idea that America overreacted to 9/11. Talk a little bit about the recent editorial that was written up.
He also talks about now in America there are 30,000 people employed just to listen to phone conversations. Now that's about the same as what we see in China. Again, another communist command and control government, centralized government. So it's Dick Cheney, the Republican Party, Donald Rumsfeld that has created this giant vacuuming, sucking sound, undermining the entire economy. And Fareed Zakaria also mentions that the federal response to Katrina demonstrates exactly the danger of this situation. The federal government's fastest and most efficient response to Hurricane Katrina was the creation of a Guantanamo-like prison facility in days in which 1,200 American citizens were summarily detained and denied any of their constitutional rights for months.
Yeah, look, I agree with Fareed in terms of the overreaction to 9/11. The material lost, lives lost, was not a big deal. I mean, insurance covered all the material loss. And remember, many of the lives lost on 9/11 were essentially financial mercenaries. I mean, these are bankers on the front line trying to impose their financial will as financial mercenaries, and we shouldn't think about the loss of these financial mercenaries any differently than we think about the loss of mercenaries like Blackwater working in Iraq or Afghanistan. Now, there was collateral damage of people, they weren't informed that they were working side by side with financial mercenaries, and that truly is a tragedy. But for the most part, we're talking about hardened banking assassins and suicide bankers, and, there was some blowback on that day. You can't win every single battle.
Well, in fact, let's talk about the cost, because this has also come out. Remember, Joseph Stiglitz a few years ago projected that the cost of the Iraq war would be $3 trillion. Well, now they've upped it. It's actually more than $3 trillion. Analysts, Iraq war partly to blame for financial crisis. So this is Joseph Stiglitz and Harvard University public policy lecturer Linda J. Boehms. So they're saying that the Iraq war forced America more into debt, which was partly caused by the increase in the price of oil. So they put about $10 per barrel to the cost of Iraq war, which cost the U.S. economy about $250 billion. That was cash that was taken out of the economy, it was capital, and sent to the Middle East.
Look, I made a prediction on this show that the insiders responsible for 9/11, like Dick Prince over there at
Eric Prince
over there at Blackwater, they would go to countries without extradition agreements. Eric Prince is now already in a country without an extradition agreement, and I predict we're going to see this for Cheney as well. I think Cheney and Bush, Rumsfeld certainly, they will all go to these countries to get outside of the reach of folks who will be wanting to have them accountable for the 9/11 that they created, the Iraq war that they created, the close to 1 million Iraqi civilians that they murdered in cold blood because of what Tony Blair just admitted to, a power play for oil. Remember, Blair was saying no blood for oil. It's not blood for oil. It is blood for oil, you lying sack of dog dirt. You should be ashamed of yourself. At least his wife should divorce him, Cherie. I mean, the guy is worthless.
Well, let's look at what this $3 trillion and this giant warfare state has done to the U.S. economy. No defense left against double-dip recession, says Nouriel Roubini. Quote, the U.S. has run out of bullets.
He's referring to policy response by the Fed and Treasury, et cetera. They have no way to fight what the deflationary collapse.
No monetary policy, no fiscal policy left. A good deal of it is caused by the reaction to 9/11, which Alan Greenspan lowered interest rates almost down to zero. And then, of course, the cost of the wars. Much of it is off balance sheet, but it exists.
Yeah, remember Bush standing on the rubble, 9/11, with his megaphone saying, Americans, Americans, we won't give in to terrorists. Keep shopping. Keep shopping. Show them you're American by getting yourself more in debt, America. And, of course, to facilitate that, Alan Greenspan, who you have to also consider as part of the, cabal of folks that really had their finger all over 9/11, he dropped interest rates down to 1%, which enabled this huge confiscation of wealth. Trillions of dollars to be zipped, out of the country, and now America's sitting there sucking its thumb wondering, well, what happened to our country? Well, it doesn't exist there anymore. America's over.
Well, look at the fact that what Ben Bernanke has said several times. What got the U.S. out of the Great Depression? World War. Paul Krugman has basically suggested that recently. Tony Blair, in this interview that we started at the top of the show, goes on to basically say we need to bomb Iran because this country that has not invaded any other country for over 200 years is somehow an existential threat. However, if you look at the history, which we're mimicking directly now, they're hoping for world war because the population is restless, they're unemployed, they're hungry, and you've got to do something to change it.
Well, look, my advice to Iran, as I've been saying, to protect yourself against the psychotic warmongering psychos like Cheney and Obama. He's certainly in the same group now. Try to borrow $50 to $100 billion from Goldman Sachs or J.P. Morgan as the first tranche of borrowing, and try to up that to $500 billion or $1 trillion as quickly as possible. Then Obama and Bernanke and the gang, instead of bombing you, they'll want to bail you out. because you'll be part of the club. I made the same recommendation to people living in Gaza. If they only had $5 or $10 billion in debt owed to J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs, they would be getting bailed out and not bombed. That's the strategy you need to take. This is what you need to participate in, the global Ponzi scheme. If you're not, Iran is self-sustaining, oil-producing. It's out there. It's not being protected by the mafia on Wall Street, so it's going to be picked off.
Well, Max, my last headline proves your assertion. Bill Black, control fraud crushes Kabul, and the New York Times need to correct its correction. So Bill Black, William K. Black, who we've interviewed on the show, says that the banking and political elites in Afghanistan, remember those banking and political elites are mostly CIA agents or protected by CIA, and their competitors are assassinated by the CIA with U.S. taxpayer money. Well, these elites basically used Kabul Bank as a weapon to defraud the population. And now the New York Times had originally reported on the run on Kabul Bank, saying that the U.S. was going to bail it out. And then they've printed a retraction. Well, William K. Black is saying, no, the U.S. taxpayer is bailing it out. Whether it's directly or indirectly, we are, because there is no other economy there but defrauding the U.S. taxpayer.
Well, William K. Black is the one guy who knows where the bodies are buried in this global financial system. That's why he'll never get the position of regulating anybody because he's simply too good at what he does. The Kabul Bank situation, yes, another example of a bank going bankrupt to protect itself against rogue banking assassins on Wall Street. And the Kabul Bank, yes, it's an example of control fraud. Yes, the U.S. will bail it out, just like Hank Paulson back in October of 2008 put a gun to Congress's head and said, if you don't give us $700 billion so we can give our banking relations in Europe, American taxpayer money, we're going to declare martial law and shut down the American economy. So says testimony from congressmen who were there at the time. They were threatened with martial law from Hank Paulson, former CEO of Goldman Sachs. So, again, let me repeat myself. Out there in Tehran, if you want to protect yourself from rogue drone bombers and other flights of fancy from large ships patrolling in the area with bombers and Marines and whatnot, you must start getting yourself more indebted to Wall Street. This is the only way you can save yourself.
Well, Tony Blair does work at J.P. Morgan. He might have a loan for them.
Call Tony up right now. Tony's Hot Shop. Tony's Debt Shop. Say, Tony, hello, Tony. Yes, it's Tehran calling. We need $5 trillion in debt, my old boy. Old sport. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report. Stacy Herbert.
Thank you, Max.
When we come back, we're going to Chicago to speak with Mike Jensen about what's happening there. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. You know, with the collapse of the Gulag casino economy, the U.S. in a deflationary spiral, millions are unemployed, tens of millions are on food stamps, and many, oh so many, are homeless. Some are fighting back, like Mike Jensen in Chicago. Mike Jensen, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Good morning, Max.
Mike Jensen, you write for the Huffington Post. Your recent blog is called Americans Unite, This is an Emergency. You list 3 problems that constitute the emergency. Tell us what they are.
Well, as you pointed out, there is much homelessness. There is a biological war going on over our food. And there's just not enough people taking care of the people that need to get sustenance.
You mentioned bio-war, which is interesting. And, of course, this brings up the topic of food that you write about extensively. Can you talk to us a little bit about the food issue and what's at stake here, what's going on, who are the players, who are the corporations? Tell us a little bit more about that, Mike Jensen.
Well, as you all know, BP has just dumped Corexit 9500 by hundreds of thousands of gallons into the Gulf, as well as 9527A. Now, 9527A has shown to produce birth defects in animals as low as 20 parts per million. Then we have Monsanto, where if you feed soy to rats, they have 90% birth defects and or stillborn, and the ones that are born are infertile. And going the same way with the 9527A and the GM crops, I would call that pretty much biological warfare.
All right, so the biological warfare, you've got the Corexit that was dumped into the Gulf by BP. You've got the modified genes that are introduced into the food chain by Monsanto. Monsanto, of course, a big player in all of this biological warfare. Famously, Monsanto involved in the Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. They're also involved in the bovine hormone drugs. They're involved in, of course, genetically modified seeds, Terminator seeds. Tell us a little bit more about Monsanto and I guess also Syngenta. Those are the two big players in the space, right?
Now, Monsanto is able to get away with the things that they're doing right now, basically because they have people that worked for Monsanto that are in the government. As high up as Clarence Thomas, who used to be a Monsanto lawyer. He is now, of course, a Chief Justice or a Justice on the Supreme Court. Well, the recombinant bovine growth hormone, Michael Taylor, had pushed that through Congress, is now just been appointed by President Obama as Chief of Food Safety. Of course, I'm thinking that they're going to not outlaw GMO foods or have them start labeling in a better manner what we are actually eating.
Yeah, I don't think many people realize the relationship between genetically modified food and intellectual property and patent laws as we see these laws applied toward creating oligopolies and duopolies, certainly in the intellectual property field of music and television and films. You've got the rise of the monopolist who's extending copyright law to create monopoly pricing in intellectual property in that realm. But Monsanto, what they've done is they've said, look, the seed is not something that's reproduced and available to all. The seed is our intellectual property. Monsanto effectively has rebranded Earth. And, Monsanto has a God complex, in other words. They believe that only they are able to bestow the globe with seeds. I mean, they have a worse God complex than even Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman Sachs. I mean, this has got to be the ugliest, most pernicious copyright intellectual property cartel the world has ever known, Monsanto. And the effect is catastrophic. It's not helping feed people. It's causing starvation, isn't it? Isn't that true, Mike Jensen?
That is not exactly causing starvation, but I mean, it's so bad that they took 375 tons of seed over to Haiti, who promptly stacked them up and burned them because, they didn't want to take that kind of risk. But yes, they do control the seeds and are putting the smaller companies out of business. It's not just the Terminator seeds, which will not reproduce seeds, but if you do have a GM crop that does reproduce seed, you're not allowed to harvest it by contract. Also, it's not just the seeds anymore. They're trying to patent pigs, and the same way now. And then after the GM pig has offspring, that's their property also.
Right, and again, it's to create a monopoly and a monopoly pricing, to reintroduce the Dark Ages and feudalism into the economy, where you've got monopolists, aristocrats who control everything, and the rest of the population is basically an indentured servant. And this is happening right under the nose of Barack Obama and the current administration of the White House, who you've done a lot of writing in terms of the revolving door that happens between the industry and the policymakers and the politicians. Talk a little bit more about that.
You've got Clarence Thomas, who is a Supreme Court justice. You've got Margaret Miller. She was the top RBGH dairy scientist. You've got Donald Rumsfeld, Michael Kandor, the most important one that we should be concerned with right now is Mike Taylor. He's a former Monsanto executive whose career literally fits the definition of the revolving door between government, lobbying, and corporate interest. Before serving on the Obama agriculture transition team, Taylor made a name for himself rotating in and out of law firms for Monsanto, the USDA, and the FDA. While at the FDA, he helped write the rules to allow RPGH into the American food system and our children's milk, which, as you know, has been causing breast development in children, little girls as small as 7.
This is the remarkable thing, Mike Jansen. The people behind the destruction of the food chain, when you think about it logically, they themselves, they're committing suicide along with homicide. Because when you wipe out the food chain, nobody survives. So this is a real mentality of an extremist mentality, isn't it? Monsanto is almost an extremist mentality of suicide gardeners.
It would seem that way. But as you know, Bill Gates has been associated with Monsanto now. And I believe they have just created the biggest seed bank or seed vault of all time. And they are storing millions and millions and millions of seeds just in case.
Well, yes, of course, Bill Gates, who made his entire fortune as a predatory monopolist, twice convicted on intellectual property law. He and Monsanto are two peas in a pod. The fact that he's using his billions to help another predatory monopolist is not something everyone should be happy about. This is just an extension of an oligopolistic, predatory aristocrats just trying to reintroduce feudalism. Now, what's happening in Chicago? In other cities around the country, we see a move toward urban farming. Is there much of this going on in Chicago?
In Chicago, I'm sad to say that there's a very small movement. In New York, you have, like 800 local farms and vacant lots are being planted and whatnot. That is not seen as much around this area, and which is why I'm trying to take on this crusade.
Well, I'd say one positive thing about the collapse of the American empire is that the U.S. dollar, after it does finally collapse, the U.S. will be competitive in exporting cotton again. So at least Americans will find jobs as cotton pickers. Is this a move, you think? Of course, Chicago is a hub for agricultural products traditionally in America. It's where all the grains have come in. It's from the Midwest. Do you see any movement in people now thinking, maybe going back to an agricultural environment at the antebellum South, perhaps? Well,
I'm not really concerned with the commercial as much as, with the collapse, as you say. If this happens the way it's going down, we're going to need the diversity of many different gardens, and I'm looking more at the community garden level to help keep people from at each other's throats.
Well, let's talk about First Lady Michelle Obama. She planted an organic garden and encouraged Americans to do the same. There was a coordinated attack by big agribusiness and big petrochemical business on the First Lady. Not even the First Lady can get out of the shadow and the eco-bio drones of the agro-industrial monarchs. What hope does the average little garden farmer have?
Again, it's kind of sad, and even the project that Michelle Obama took on for trying to feed the obese kids, sad to say, Congress, in their infinite wisdom, to get behind Michelle Obama's push to get better food in the schools, they took the money from the SNAP program, which is the food stamp program. That's what they were planning on doing at the last time I looked at it. But, that's just silly. Congress is going to take money from people who don't have anything to give the fat kids better food.
Well, there's massive deflation in the United States, and I think people are confusing the rise in food prices as evidence of inflation. Of course, that's not. It's an evidence of the complete lack of competition in this industry. There's no increase in demand. There's a shortage of supply, which is causing food prices to go up, which is not inflation. This is byproduct of the deflation, and they have no money to spend in this way. Now, your recent post is called Americans Need Local Leadership for the War at Home. Tell us about the war at home. What sort of response have you received regarding the call for local leadership? You're a high-profile blogger on Huffington Post. What's the feedback you get in the comments and from other folks to your recent blogs?
There is a good response from some people. When it was posted on your blog, it was pointed out to me that this is a worldwide problem and that a lot of people should really start thinking about learning this and getting back to basics.
Right. Well, of course, the entire economy is geared toward moving in the complete opposite direction. So it's going to take a Herculean task to overcome the forces of centralization and now globalization. All right. Well, Mike Jansen, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All righty. That's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with Max Keiser and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Mike Jansen. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.